Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another session of Lens. Thank you so much for being here. Today, it is my pleasure and an honor to have one of my all time favorite people in the world, the person who essentially motivated me and inspired me to go into education. Our guest is design educator Alex Lobos. A little bit of Alex. Alex focuses on design, technology, sustainability, and emotional attachment as means to elevate quality of life. He is professor of and graduate director of industrial design at the Rochester Institute of Technology, RIT, and research fellow emeritus at Autodesk. His work and design courses have been sponsored by Autodesk, AT&T, Colgate, Palmolive, General Electric, MakerBot, Stryker, Staples, and Unilever, covering topics such as learning futures, generative design, digital fabrication, sustainable behaviors, and everyday living. Alex, thank you so much for being here. Um, and for those who are attending, I encourage you to ask questions in the Q&A, and we will make sure that we do our best to integrate them in the Q&A section of our session. Alex, I'm going to go ahead and give the floor over to you, and we'll take it from there.
Sounds great. Hector, thank you so much for having me and for the kind invitation. The admiration, goes to you. You have created such an amazing community. And yeah, I mean, our history goes back way more than 10 years. And, I love that, we started collaborating, at UIUC, when you were a student and I was faculty. And then from there, the relationship has grown into becoming colleagues and friends, and seeing how diverse our careers have gone. So it's awesome to be here today. So thank you to everyone in the advanced design community for joining us. So I see one comment about the Zoom background. I have to say that this is my actual music studio. I'm a musician. That's another part of my life that I don't think we'll get to discuss today. But yeah, I play the drums, and I've been playing bass for just over a year. And actually, I think that will somehow be covered today. Not the music part per se, but this idea of how everything that you do becomes who you are. So when Hector and I started talking about this idea of having me in Lens, a topic that came up was design and identity, and I think as many of us have been thinking about this lately, with everything that's happening in the world, I think that it's really important to address this. And today, I will actually talk about design and identity from three angles, which I feel that are very important. The first one is a personal or individual, how I feel that my own identity has been shaped, throughout the years. Then talking about our profession, our discipline as it's, always moving. And then lastly, the impact, the output, the legacy that we leave with the work, the products that we create. So let's start with the personal identity. What I realized is that in order for us to develop our own identity, we actually have to let go of the identities that we have at some point. The more that I think about it, the more that I feel that if you are always in your same circle and you are completely true to that, and you never get out of that and explore different things, then your identity never becomes your own. And you don't have an actual identity because there's no mix, there's no unique combination that happens. So in my case, and I'm guessing that many of you already noticed my accent. I was born and raised in Guatemala, in Central America. And I have to say that growing up for me, that was a very interesting experience. I always say that I miss my family dearly. I miss my friends. I miss all the experiences that happened that had to do with people. But I feel that in general, it was always hard for me to live in Guatemala. And it hasn't been until recent years that I've closed the circle and that I become comfortable with the idea of being in Guatemala. Kind of ironic, right? Because now I don't live there anymore, and maybe that's what it took for me to realize that. So when you think about Guatemala, I think images like this become common, right? So a lot of people think of Guatemala as a lot of these very interesting cultural and historical contexts, and like what you see in here, it's a street in Antigua, Guatemala, which is a colonial city that was the capital of the country in the 16th century. So this is what people see. A lot of people see the Mayan ruins and they connect, Guatemala with a lot of that. In my case, this was my reality. So, I grew up in Guatemala City. It's a city that now it's getting close to 3 million people. It's very chaotic. There's a lot of contrast, both good and bad. You can see a lot of wealth, a lot of poverty, a lot of injustices, also a lot of resilience. And I think that all of those things, help me, to shape, who I am. And maybe I didn't realize it back then. I also realize now that, there's so much connection with, modern society as well as with nature in Guatemala. You can see it in the picture where, for example, there's 22 volcanoes in Guatemala, so there's a lot of natural richness that surrounds you, yet at the same time, I feel that sometimes it's very hard to connect with that, especially when you grow up in the city. So I grew up in Guatemala. I got my undergrad degree in industrial design there, and I started working there. And for me, there was always the idea, the thinking of I want to go somewhere else. I want to explore other things that are possible in other industries, in other countries that are not possible in Guatemala. So after a lot of looking into opportunities, etc., I ended up coming to the United States. So that was 18 years ago, which is crazy. And I came here for grad school. I came here with a Fulbright scholarship, and I always say that that was one of the biggest blessings that I received. I don't think there's another way that I could have afforded, coming here to the States. And I feel that that was a key element for this idea of me, defining my identity. Because I feel, and if any of you have ever migrated, or maybe you are international, students living here in the U.S. or in other parts of the world, there's this challenge of, you are looking forward to embracing, new processes, new ways of doing things, to the point where sometimes you start double guessing, where you are coming from. And I think in my case, that was true. I realized that, when I came here, it's almost like I had to relearn how I sketched, how I modeled, how I presented design, how I was, looking for jobs, trying to build my network. And that's just in the design part, right? Every part of my life had to go through that process. What I see that's happening today is that, now I feel that I'm in between these two scenarios. I'm a U.S. citizen. I'm also a Guatemala citizen. Both of them allow dual citizenships. It's funny that when I go back to Guatemala, people ask me where I'm from, because now I have an accent and I don't look like a stereotypical Guatemalan, I guess. And when I'm here in the States, it's also obvious that I came from somewhere else. And that's a hard thing to accept. I think that at some point, understanding that in order to find your own identity, where you feel comfortable, sometimes you have to let go of these, comfortable or more, secure settings that you have. This is an image that I found a few days ago. I was actually thinking about which projects to show today, and I stumbled into these images from my portfolio back in undergrad. So I'm thinking it's actually funny that I'm showing this today. That I was brave enough to show you, some of my really early work, student work back in Guatemala. So as you can imagine, in Guatemala, there's a lot of focus on lower complexity of industries. There's a lot of furniture, tableware, housewares, jewelry. Artisan work. And artisan design is very common. And I want you to pay attention to this design in particular. This I feel was one of the first designs where I felt like I knew what I was doing. So this is a candle holder, and actually the reference that it has comes from Mayan tradition that's called palo volador. So that's a flying sticks. So you have this huge stick, this huge pole, and you have four people that go to the top, and then they let themselves go, and they start spinning around the pole. So it's a ritual dance. It's very interesting to watch, etc., etc. And then the idea with this candle holder is that you could actually spin some of the candles, not too fast because you don't want to create any fires. But it's funny that this image came to mind just a few days ago, and it made me realize that it's actually very well connected to some of the designs that I do nowadays. So what you see in here is a lamp that I designed with David Villarreal. He's a grad student. He was a grad student at RIT, and this is a table lamp that we designed using Fusion 360 and digital fabrication. I guess what I find interesting is that I look at the old lamp, and yes, I can see how that connected to myself back then. I look at this lamp now, and I realize how it connects with what I'm interested in now. To give you a little bit more detail about this lamp, this is a table lamp that we wanted to create in a very simple, very fluid way in Fusion 360. We wanted to highlight, how organic and how elegant, how fluid designs can be, and then take it, to take advantage of digital fabrication. The modeling process is actually kind of simple. You set up a three-way symmetry. And then once you have that symmetry, you have three rings, and then you connect them in only 3 points each. And then because of the three-way symmetry, you can create this shape very quickly. And then it's just a matter of playing with proportions and adding some fillets to it. One thing that I love about this lamp is that once you add the fillet, all of that fillet is continuous. Details like those, I feel that have to do with how unified, how integrated a design can be. So back then, once we had the design, we created this in the shopbot, a CNC router in RIT's model shop. So I feel that this was a very interesting experience, very humble approach for fabricating this, but we were able to have the actual output. After this, Autodesk actually asked me if I was interested in them creating their own version of the lamp. So for this, I have to thank Jeff Smith and Michael Sagan. So this was done at Tier 9 with their amazing tools that they have, and you can see how the lamp has kept evolving. When I was there last year during one of my trips during the fellowship, I actually saw the most recent stage of the lamp. So what you see here now is a sensor that detects the gestures of people moving around them. So depending on how close and how fast you move near the lamp, you will have different different patterns and different colors that illuminate the lamp. So I guess my point with this is that one of the things that I've noticed throughout my life is that you are always developing your identity. And I think that many times what we are hoping is that we get to a point where we feel confident, we feel like, yes, I got it, this is who I am. And that will never happen. Identity is not an outcome, it's a process. It will never stop. It is not fixed, it's not a goal, it's something that you pursue for your entire life. So moving on to the second part, which has to do around design and the discipline of industrial design. I'm guessing that like many of you, industrial design didn't mean much when you first heard about it. I can tell you that when I went into design school, I actually went into graphic design. I had no idea that industrial design existed. I heard the name, and now I realize that for me, that meant mechanical engineering. I thought that it had to do with creating mechanisms, complex parts for utilitarian components. And later on, I realized that industrial design is what it is. One of the things that I noticed, and this is something that I've heard ever since I attended the first IDSA conference, and maybe that was 15, 16 years ago, is that industrial design is changing, that the name of our discipline is no longer accurate, and it doesn't describe what we are, what we do, who we are, and that now is the time for industrial design to shine. I've been hearing that for 15 years. And what I'm thinking is that time is already happening, and that transition is eternal. So the fact that you see something like this happening for 15 years, and then you think that you are getting to that point, you are already there. And again, you have to acknowledge that things will be changing forever. I don't know if any of you have followed the SpaceX project. For me, one of the things that captured my attention the most was this comparison of the space shuttles. So you can see there, at the top, the Apollo, stage, the Apollo cabin, then the Columbia shuttle in the middle, and then down, in the lower part of the screen, Dragon 2, from SpaceX. When I looked at this, I realized that this exemplifies what industrial design is going through. What I see is that there's a lot of mechanical complexity at the top that eventually is replaced by digital complexity. And at the very bottom, you see a lot of cleanliness and a lot of digital interaction. And what I noticed is that I feel that the discipline has moved from being very heavy on hardware and mechanics to being very heavy on software and interactions. When you think about products, throughout time, is the same, is the same process. So maybe some of you still remember, the flip phones from the 2000s. When you think about those, devices, there was still a lot of attention given to physical interaction. Buttons, limited screens, different parts, different components. In comparison, the devices that we use today are very clean, are very simple. But the complexity hasn't gone away. On the contrary, the complexity is now tenfold, if not more, of what it used to be. So what I've noticed is that this complexity has moved away from physical, and it has become a lot more digital. And that, I think, shows the transition that we are having as a discipline. And I feel that we are struggling with it because we still want to tie it to what was the origin of industrial design, which was mechanical approaches. So what I want to say with this is that I feel that our identity is more than our name. I think that sometimes we are too fixated on industrial design, and we feel that we want to change the name to show something that represents us better. My question is, how long will that last before it needs to change again? Think of this as an experiment. If you were to give yourselves a name today, will you name yourself the name that you use? And if you can imagine yourself 10, 20 years from now, do you think that that name will remain relevant? Or do you think that you will feel like you could change it again? So if we think of design, and I'd like to use this this metaphor because I feel that we hear a lot about how good design is a bridge that connects the user with the environment and experiences. I feel that when the discipline started, there was a lot of focus on the industrial part, just making these things happen, right? Think of someone envisioning the Brooklyn Bridge, all of the complexity, materials. How are we going to make this a reality? How are we going to connect this? Once the bridge was there, you kind of move to a product stage where you start paying a lot of attention to the product itself. You start noticing the details. You start noticing and feeling proud and excited about all of the elements that you were able to bring together. How cool they look, how much they complement the space. Once you get on the bridge, then the focus moves to interaction. Now you can have an interactive experience with it. And I feel that that's where design has been moving. Now we hear a lot about experiences because, for example, in the case of a bridge, at some point you realize that the bridge is nothing but a connection point. What it's interesting, for example, in this case, is that you can make it to Manhattan and you can enjoy what that island has to offer. So as you see, this is a continuously evolving definition and focus of what design is. So I think it's okay to call it industrial design. At least we know what we are talking about. But I don't think that we can assume that there's going to be a name that will define it forever. If you ask me, in my personal opinion, because I feel that experience in design has been around for a while, I actually think that automation is the next stage for design, where we see the capability, the scalability, and the creativity that machine learning can provide to us beyond the scale that we can provide ourselves. So I feel that that's an area that we're beginning to explore in a very interesting way. If any of you are curious about this image that you see, this is a 3D printed bridge that was proposed by MX3D, and a version of it is actually being created and installed in Amsterdam, where you have a bridge that was designed using generative design. So what I see with this, and I feel that this becomes part of the identity of industrial design as a profession, is that the problem around us are always becoming more complex, and they are also becoming less tangible. Just like when we think about the possibilities and how we connect systems and experiences and branding today goes well beyond what any unique product could do. Lastly, I want to talk about product, and by product I mean any output that we create with the design that we make. So I'm not assuming that product has to be a tangible object. In my experience, that's the area where I focus the most. So yeah, I mean, I connect product with physical objects, but I'm aware that product can be any type of design outcome that benefits the life of someone. So I've been talking about how identity keeps expanding. And then a question that I have is if design can keep up with it. We see a lot of expansion in, for example, identity and design. You can think of gender, you can think of beliefs, you can think of race, a lot of different things. And I feel that the idea of meeting those needs and understanding users at a very individual level, it's making design a lot more interesting, a lot more purposeful, but also a lot harder to execute. I also see it with how it's connecting cultures and how it's connecting generations at multiple levels. I'm sure that, or I hope that Hector will be happy to see this image of these cool shoes. Some of the things that I find interesting about these shoes are, these are the same shoes that I was excited about when I was growing up, when I was a child. And now you see these, designs, coming back again. So I love the idea of connecting different generations, with the same design. And I've had conversation about designs like this with my children, for example, where both of us get excited about the same product. I think that is a very powerful thing. One of the things that I feel that is changing is how technology is allowing us, to do different things. So, for example, what you see here are Nike, Air Max, one from '97, so that's the original, edition, and then another one, the 720 that was actually, created in 2017. As similar as they look, you see that the influences come from different angles. In '97, a lot of the influence came, from Japanese bullet trains. now this influence came from, the previous, the latest iteration came from the original shoe itself. The shoe on the left has an air sole. That was its innovation, and it has a lot of components. So you have the sole, the midsole, the upper sole, you have different rubbers, different materials. The technology in the right allow you to create all of this out of a single part. So there's a lot of refinement that happens in design nowadays. But there's this very interesting connection to, to the past or to other parts of culture. I see that in appliances, for example, how, the level of craftsmanship and the level of attention to detail and sometimes even luxury, can become so apparent in these objects. How the experiences, even in a place as utilitarian as a kitchen, are now becoming so connected and so digital. And another part that I find interesting, there's a lot of talks about generative design and how, it connects all of these complex shapes. And I begin to see, executions of generative design in the market that are actually, a lot more neutral, a lot more integrated. So this is a chair that was designed by Philippe Stark and Cartel, and Autodesk had a lot to do with it. They provided the software, and this is the first, commercial product that used artificial intelligence to be developed. So one of the questions that I have about identity when you think about products is if that identity is provided by the manufacturer, by the designer, or if it's something that's developed over time by the user. Think of a guitar, for example. You can think of many ways of customizing a guitar, from different pickups to different finishes to different woods or materials, for necks, for bodies. There's a lot of ways of making this your own. But at the end of the day, the one way that will be the most preferred for you to make this your own is yourself. By use, sometimes by abuse, by using the product. And if a product is strong enough to continue working over time, that provides that identity. And it's not an identity that's created in a vacuum by itself. It's an identity that's linked to the user. So I think that makes this very powerful. This is a design that I created, a couple of months ago, and I feel that this, for me, kind of brings together this idea of defining, like a purpose, or trying to think about what identity, a product can have. So the interesting story with this lamp is that I created it right after, the pandemic started. And one of the things that I was interested in doing was to be able to create a lamp in my house, with my own 3D printer. So I was thinking, for example, the other lamp that I showed you that was created at Pier 9, this shop by Autodesk, that had amazing resources. I was thinking, now I don't have anywhere to go. So how can I create a lamp that, has, these qualities that I'm looking for that I can do at home? So this was my experiment with creating a lamp. What you see in here are 5 bases that are printed out in a MakerBot. I actually used a filament that combines PLA with bamboo. So you can see in the left side of the image that there's actually a lot of grain that is visible in the part. So when you sand it, it gives you a better idea of a natural material instead of a plastic one. The screen is actually made out of the same filament that never went into the printer. It went straight into the holes that I created in the parts, and that's how you create the translucency. So what I find interesting with this lamp is that, on the product part, I feel that it has a very strong identity. It looks interesting, like you want to come closer to it. There's a level of, mystery with, the translucency of the lamp. At the technological level, I think that it reflects, the technology that is happening now. I realize that I tend to navigate to these products that are somehow simple, but I love the idea of using high technology, to create them. Culturally, it's so cool that I can look back at this lamp and think of this was created during the pandemic. And it was created because of the need of the pandemic, thinking that it was hard for me to go outside of my house to create an object. And then using that as a way of defining what this is. And then lastly, I feel that this lamp connects with me at a personal level, because I feel that it carries some of this cultural identity that I was telling you about, coming from Guatemala, playing with different materials or different levels of contrast, but then everything, putting everything together in a way that reflects my reality now. Working at RIT, being collaborating with someone like Autodesk. So I guess this is my last point. To wrap things up, what I've come to realize is that identity is not something that happens around you and that you discover one day. I think identity is something that you already have in you, and sometimes you need to stop, look within yourself, and then discover what you already have. So this is what I have for you, and now let's let the conversation begin.
All right. Thank you so much, Alex. That was fantastic. Thanks for sharing. Um, yeah, it's a very interesting topic regarding identity, I think, because I don't think it's something that students learn or something that you learn in school, or some schools and some professors might teach it, but it's definitely something, like you said, that I think everyone brings their own sense of identity to the conversation, and figuring out what that is and how you can explore and develop is it's a very interesting path. So I would love to jump into these questions that we have here. We have a couple of questions so far. In the beginning, you did talk a little bit about yourself, and you kind of laid the foundation of your identity being from Guatemala. Um, you know, you studied industrial design in undergrad, and which university did you attend when you were in Guatemala?
So I went to Universidad Rafael Andívar, which is a private university, and it's a Catholic private university. And back then, it was the only school in Central America that had an industrial design program. And it was a very small program. I mean, back then we had about 8 or 9 students per class, um, and you know, industrial design was just uh, being born. I feel that. I mean, I know that you hear it a lot where people say, "Yeah, no one knows what industrial design is, etc., etc." It was the same thing for us. I remember going first not knowing myself what industrial design was, and then discovering it, but then trying to convince people that you were providing value, if they wanted to hire you. Um, so it was a very interesting experience. At the same time, I realized that it was the industrial design scene in Guatemala was not necessarily what I was the most excited about. Like I said, there was a lot of focus on lighting, furniture, handcrafts, and I was always curious about products that had more complexity. So I think that maybe that career curiosity combined with the cultural curiosity, where I felt that maybe Guatemala was too harsh or too traditional for me. All of those things together were what pushed me into moving somewhere else.
Yeah, I think it's interesting whenever I have conversations with designers, minority designers that come from, not designers that don't have a European background, because we go to school, and they teach us about the history of industrial design, and this is something that Spencer. We had Spencer on this lunch session, and he has brought this up, where they teach you the history of industrial design is very Eurocentric, and they teach you that it was started in Europe. It came from Scandinavian, and started by a bunch of white guys. But when you're coming from other parts of the world, like Asia, India, South America, and things like that, I think it's really interesting, because I think you've identified a very amazing part about you growing up in Guatemala, is being inspired and being looking at where you live and using that to using that in your own design practice. And I think that is something that I can relate to. Most recently, um, I've been designing. I've been looking at, because I'm Mexican, so I've been looking at old Mexican objects and artifacts to redesign. And I'm not redesigning them to completely change the historical content, or move away or take away from these archetypes, because they mean so much to our culture. But I'm looking at them so that you know um, these archetypes can exist in my life as a millennial, or they can I'm able to they're able to live in our generation, right? So what I'm talking about is like a tortilla press, which has been around for almost a century and hasn't been redesigned. But that's a cultural archetype that gets passed around. um, so I think identity in design is very important, and I think you brought up a lot of amazing insights. Here's a couple of questions that we have here. This question is from.
Hector, before we move on to the next question, there's something that I wanted to expand on what you are saying, because I think so. I told you about kind of my experience in Guatemala, right, and then moving to the States. So when I came here, I came to University of Notre Dame, which you know very well, and I think, I mean, the cultural shock was huge. I mentioned, this culture shock of, oh, I thought that I had some skills, back home. And now when I come to the US and I start seeing portfolios, I'm going to IDSA events, I realize, no, I mean, I need to, retrain myself. But I feel that the other part that made things very interesting for me is that a lot of these values, a lot of this uniqueness, like broader perspective that I have, I didn't realize it until later in my career. And I want to say that even maybe in grad school, it was where um, I was more unsure of it. It's almost like you have this cycle where you feel like things are better on somewhere else, right? And once you get there and you notice the differences, then you assume that whatever you have is not good enough. And so I think that it took me a lot of time, even way after I graduated, that I actually started realizing that my perspective was wider. Just like you said, that in the US, I learned about all the white dudes that made, design what it is. But then I had a lot of other knowledge about, design in Latin America or design in other parts of Europe or the world, because my culture had access to those. And those were areas that maybe the US was seeing.
Yeah.
So I feel like you almost have to go through these cycles where you don't realize things right away. And a lot of the things that I feel that now give me a wider perspective, when I was in grad school, for example, I don't think that I felt too confident about it. And I'm mentioning this because I know that there's a lot of students that are in the same position. I see it with my students. I see the conversations in Lens where a lot of people are confused. A lot of people are like, man, like, am I gonna get a job because I have this accent, or because I look like this, or because my sketching style is different? So I guess I'm saying, yeah, I get you. It's hard. What I noticed at some point is that that's what makes you unique. That is your identity. And if you go to Behance or Coroflot, you can find thousands of images that have the same sketching style. So you need to embrace those differences if you really want to stand out and if you want to make something that makes you feel good about yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is. I think you've really nailed that very specific topic. Um, you did cover, I think you showed a really good example of industrial product interaction and experience. And I think that's a very hot topic right now, especially since a lot of students are recently graduated students are looking for employment, and you run into product design opportunities, but product design opportunities sometimes don't translate to our term of product design. They translate to user interaction. um, so would you say that product design falls under the spectrum of industrial design?
I think that it's a different way of looking at it. Again, I think my point, for example, with the analogy of the bridge is, traditionally industrial design is a little bit more focused on the process. How do you create something, and mass produce it? And when you think about it, it's almost like natural evolution. Like first you take care of those basic needs. Once those are taken care of, you start paying attention to the details. So that's where I feel that product design becomes more evident, because you have time to appreciate the product and refine the craft and make it a little bit better. To be honest with you, I feel that that's where a lot of the issue is, that I think that we get too in love with what we do and we miss the big picture, which is what you do with that product. You know what I mean? Like if I'm holding this, it's because I want to write something. I have an idea in mind that I want to to translate. So at some point, this becomes irrelevant. If I'm a designer, yeah, I will pay attention to this. But most people, like, they couldn't care less. It's either this or this, or this, whatever is closer to my hand. So I think that I feel that awareness of there's more than product, I think it's important. Maybe what you are talking about is this transition of going, from tangible to intangible.
Mhm.
And actually, when I worked at GE, I kind of went through that. When right after grad school, I started working at GE Appliances, and it was the time when digital interfaces were coming into the mainstream. So for some reason, I was very interested in that. I love that process. So I was very involved in developing the first generation of touch screens for GE Appliances back then. What I noticed was that the way that you thought about the problems was the same. Like you thought about someone wanting to do something and then interacting with a human-made system in order to achieve it. The difference was that you were moving away from touch points, like handles, knobs, drawers, and then you were getting more into like cognitive and visual cues. So I feel that to a certain degree, if you have that awareness of understanding these interactions and this workflow, then it's irrelevant if your product becomes tangible as an object or intangible as an interface. I think the process is the same. Uh, my feeling is that if you want to be a successful designer today, you need to control both. If you are an industrial designer, being a good tangible form giver is a given. Like that has to be your basic competence. Being aware of digital and intangible interactions, that is what's gonna make a difference right now. But I think maybe 10 years from now, that is gonna be a given as well.
Mm. Yeah, you definitely bring up a lot of great questions. What is identity? What is industrial design? And where do they come from? If someone asked you what you do, how best would you summarize that to a stranger?
What I do as a designer, you mean?
As an industrial designer.
an
Hmm.
industrial designer? Well, I mean, I always like to think that I help to make life better, and that's my that's my ultimate goal. What I know is that if I tell that to someone, it sounds like a lot of BS, and I didn't give them a straight answer. I feel that, and this is more of my personal training and my where I see my abilities. I think that my strengths are in creating tangible solutions, and maybe that's just because of how I'm wired or how I was trained. But yeah, I see that for me creating three-dimensional objects is very natural in interactive interfaces. I can do it, but I feel that I need to put a little bit more effort into it. So that's my own experience. I think that in general, if, for me, industrial design nowadays again is solving needs with solutions that are either tangible, sorry, that are tangible and or intangible, that have a very direct connection with the user. And I think that's what's defining industrial design nowadays, that the scale is still at a fairly personal level. Versus those other types of design where the scale either becomes very big or the connection becomes a lot more complex because you are connecting with parts of a system that are not close together.
Hmm. Okay, yeah, that's actually very well said. Here's a very good question that really relates to the political climate that we're in right now. This is a question that was asked by one of our attendees. Being an international student in the current political conditions makes me more insecure of my identity and being able to explore it through my work. How do I express it without offending anyone and use it to straighten my the process?
I hear you because you know I think I struggle with that myself. I think we all do. I think a lot of what these last few years have done is that they challenge your confidence and they challenge your values. So I guess the first thing that I will say is that anyone who's feeling like this is totally normal. I think we are all feeling that way to more or less degree. Um, I think that for me, something that I realize now is that coming from a different background provides me more perspective. Having an accent means that I can speak more than one language. So that gives me an advantage. Being able to navigate within different disciplines or cultures or even music. Like I listen to music in two, three, four different languages, and that's how I was raised. That gives me a wider vision on things. So I feel that that is something that should make anyone feel very confident and very good about themselves. And I think it's okay to filter it. You know, at some point you can go into a conversation or a situation where you realize if I have these four perspectives, maybe this is the perspective that I'm going to highlight the most. It's not that you are hiding the other ones, but you're reading your audience very well. So I think as an international student, which by the way, we are all international students. You know what I mean? People here from the US, if they go to Guatemala or any other place, they are the international ones. So I feel that being able to filter and know your audience, just like in design, you have to know your audience when you are in any type of social or cultural situation or political situation. Knowing your audience is going to make you a lot more effective. I guess what I'm saying is you need to be proud that you have more perspective. Uh, that doesn't mean that you need to show all of those perspectives at the same time.
Mhm. Absolutely. Here's a question that is asked by Colin. This question is, I'm having a bit of an identity crisis. Do you find yourself in a stage of reinvention after every project? Also, how do you let your own identity flourish while working within a team?
So the identity crisis, yes, totally. I mean, I can tell you, in my own experience. So I feel that with this talk, I talked a lot about, my cultural identity, right? From Guatemala, from the U.S., like, where do I stand? You see my drum set in the background. I have struggled with that too, where at some point I had to make decisions. Am I a musician or am I a designer? Even within design, am I an industrial designer or a design educator? And even if I'm both, I can tell you, and Hector, I think that you will agree with me in this case, when you go in, people still put a hat on you. And I've gone to places where people think of me as the educator, and if I start talking about design, I can sense that they are not as receptive as that part, because now I'm teaching, I'm not designing anymore, even though it's all one big activity, and I know that I can do any of it. So I feel that there's always going to be a crisis, and I think that you need to embrace it. Crisis means that you need to move, and things that move are the things that stay alive. Things that stay still, they don't survive. So as hard as it is, you have to go through that crisis. And maybe that crisis can be anything from learning, like a new software package, to reading a new book, or like trying to venture into, okay, I'm not this, as good for, I'm not as good at interaction design. Maybe I need to get better at it. So that's one part that I noticed. The other one, you were asking about interaction with teams. Um, I I think that with teams you need to do two things. I mean, there's more, but one is I feel that you need to try to be yourself. I feel that if you are more relaxed and you are more open, then people start accepting you better, because they sense more honesty coming from you. If you put a wall, that's a limitation that you have. That's energy that you are not sending out. So that's energy that you're not getting back. That's the thing with a wall. It blocks both sides. The other one is that I feel that you also need to be very attentive to the team. Just like you want to be heard and respected and embraced by the team, you also need to embrace everyone in the team and bring everyone into the conversation. I feel that if you think of this as it's a two-way street, I think that that's something that starts, expanding to other members of a group.
Absolutely. And I think we do need to change, and it will be changed, and it's going to change that aspect of being identified, because I think a lot of designers are not just industrial designers. They wear many hats, like you mentioned, and sometimes we're identified as one or the other, but not as a whole as a designer. And I totally relate to what you said about being a design educator. When you're in a conversation or when you're doing your own practice, and a lot of people don't want to hear what you have to say, in regards to design, because you're there to educate. So it's very interesting, and there's always a crisis, like you mentioned. Um, Here's a question that's asked by Henry. You talked about letting go of your identities, personal and professional, to continuously develop your identity. Have you actively pushed yourself to let go of your identities in the past? If so, how? And how we might apply this in our own lives?
Um, so yeah, I feel that I have done that, several times. I mean, I think for me, the biggest one was, when I moved here. That was a huge a huge decision. I didn't take it by myself, by the way. When I moved here, I had just gotten married, so it was a decision that my wife and I both shared. But it was a big deal. I mean, it was a big commitment. It was also letting go, of a lot of things back there that would have made life comfortable for us because they already had a direction. I'm glad that I did it because I was able to discover what I really liked and what I was capable of. Looking back, what I realized again is that now that I am here, I was able to revalue what I had left behind. So now I find it closer to my heart, and I don't think that would have happened if I had stayed there. So I think that you need to look for these opportunities, things that you are curious about, and then you need to go and put yourself out there. So, I mean, I think, sometimes it's like you know, maybe I'm not good at digital sketching. So get yourself a tablet, an iPad, and start sketching. And you're gonna suck at first, but eventually you're gonna get it. Generative design. Like I'm not so good at that. Well, push yourself into it. I feel that the specific things that you can jump into, I'm sure that if you ask yourself that question within 5 seconds, you will know the things that you are curious about. The things that, yeah, I've been wanting to try that. Yeah, I feel that in order for me to get that promotion, I should probably learn this. Just go for them. It's not easy at first. I mean, being uncomfortable is not fun, but that's the only way that you evolve and that you keep moving. My feeling is that as you do that, your identity becomes stronger. I think that also your confidence becomes stronger because eventually you realize, like, yeah, I can, I, I was able to go through this. I was able to come, you know, I'll come back alive after this.
Yeah, I don't I think it's really interesting um because everything that you just talked about, I and I'm sure with a lot of our attendees that are watching and tuning in, we can totally relate to what you're saying. I think it's very easy for us to try to fit in when you go to design school, when you're an undergrad a student, and you don't know much about design. You just want to fit in, so that you're part of something. Um, as you learn and as you gain confidence and as you get a little bit of internship experience, you want to be a part of what's happening. You want to be a part of the party. You want to be a part of what's trending right now. What are the design challenges that are happening? How can I be a part of that? And right now, social media, really amplifies that. Everyone wants to be a part of something. And that, and when I was a student, that was, it was, my identity never, really, unless you sat down with me and you were able, to interview me and you were able to know more about me, then I would probably be a little more vulnerable and open up about who I am and my identity. But the more that I realize and the more that I'm listening to you talk about, identity and design, I feel like now in retrospect, I feel like I did it all wrong because I wish that when I was a student, I did do more work around my culture and my identity, and I wish I was more vocal about it, so that I could be an ambassador and some type of I can be a bridge between that world and the world that I live in. Um, so that I wouldn't have to fit in, so that I would, like you mentioned, that is something unique about everyone. Everyone kind of has an identity, and you should embrace it and be, proud of it, and talk about it and write about it and get published about it. And I think that's a very amazing thing to do. I'm doing that now as I think as I'm older and I'm able to reflect more. I'm able to now dive into some of the things that I should have done a really long time ago and talk about how they relate to my identity.
Right. Yeah, no, I hear you, Hector. It's hard. And you mentioned social media, and I feel that that is a sword of two edges, right? So on one hand, it provides such a great platform for you to express yourself and to influence other people. At the same time, it puts so much pressure on you. And like these last few months, for example, whenever something, bad happens, that people are beginning to react, and then at some point, like a few times I've noticed that I start getting this feeling of maybe I'm not posting enough, or this person just came back from a protest. This person just went and did this. This person just put this sign in. Like I haven't done anything today. Oh my gosh! Like how can I say that I support this cause if I haven't done it? So it's very easy for you to get trapped into I'm not doing enough, or someone is doing this. Like I'm a fake because I'm not really as proactive as I am. And a few times like I become conscious of that, and then I realize no. I mean, I I support this cause. I've also learned to know myself, and I know where I'm stronger at, where I'm comfortable at, what my limits are. And it's okay for me to push that and to like to be more active, but I think it's also okay if some days I just feel overwhelmed, or if some days I realize like I can do this but I cannot go to a protest because of some other reasons. So I feel again that this kind of goes back to the idea of identity, right? Like you it's okay for you not to do everything. It's just like in design, right? Like I see so much conversation, and again with design education, and nowadays where people are saying, well, design education is not doing enough, and there's so many things that need to be learned, and then students are coming out of school without all of these skills. And I hear that, and at the same time I think, how could anyone absorb that much knowledge and skills and everything, given the short amount of time that they. And it's also a very fragile time where people are shaping themselves. I think back of my years in school, that's where a lot of my personality and my convictions happened, on top of learning all of the skills that I needed to. So I think that we also need to be very patient with ourselves. We need to understand that no one can do everything, and we all have limits.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that wraps up our conversation with Alex. For those who are interested to continue talking about identity, we are going to jump into Afterlens, which is another Zoom session that happens after this. Everyone should have received an email to invite you to come on Afterlens. If you want to know more about Alex, Alex was also interviewed on our podcast, Context with Advanced Design, and it's episode 33. I highly recommend you listen to that because I sit down with Alex and he talks more about his personal life and how he got to design and through obstacles and challenges, and how he is now a design educator at RIT. So I highly encourage you to reference that. This Lens webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on YouTube later for you to reference. So I highly suggest that you tune back in. But thank you so much, Alex, for your time, for your insights. I think identity is a really big part of design that we really don't talk about. And I wish that more educators and more designers talked about it, because I think it can definitely shape and it can definitely inform a lot of the up and coming generation of designers. And in a time like this where our political climate is very difficult with some of the people that lead our country, and our country is made up of all walks of life, we should be embracing each other, and we should be encouraging everyone to be proud of their identity. So thank you so much for your time and for your insights.
You're welcome, Hector. Always a pleasure. And like you said, I think that, especially these times are challenging everyone. And I think there's a lot of situations that are making us doubt who we are, where we come from, or the things that we want to do and support. And that was part of what this session was about, to tell to people, you are who you are, and that is awesome.
Mhm,
There's no one else that is you,
mhm.
and you need to embrace it, and you need to use that to create the impact that you want to create. So as much as it makes sense that right now you hear a lot of things that are challenging everything around you, you need to trust that you are where you are because you deserve to be there and because you have earned being there. And from there, there's a lot of exciting places where you can continue to grow. So, Hector, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for being so generous with your time, joining us, and for the questions. Feel free to reach out if you want to continue a conversation at any time.
Thank you so much, and we will see you at Afterlens. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone.